Well, to go through the papers this morning, I'm delighted to be joined now by the former head of press at Number 10, Giles Kenningham. Giles, good to see you. Thank you for coming in. And it's Easter Sunday, but we still have some political stories within our papers. What do you want to start with this morning?
Yeah, look, there's a deluge of polls across the papers. It makes pretty grim reading if you're a Tory MP or if you're a Tory supporter. They often say the Tory party has two modes, panic and complacency. I suspect the polls this morning are going to be make grim reading and rattle a lot of nerves. The Sunday Times has this poll which is pretty comprehensive of 15.
A mega poll, I think they're calling it.
15,000 people saying the Tories could have their worst ever election result in history. They could go down to under 100 MPs. And I suppose crucially for them, they're saying that nearly 13 cabinet ministers could lose their seats. Rishi Sunak's seat is under threat, as is Jeremy Hunt's.
Yes, and I was looking at that story and it was saying that the only one really that had any sort of a safe seat was Kemi Badenoch.
Yeah, which will do, no doubt, is the front runner to be the leader if the Tories lose at the next election. Yeah,
and the Tories, it's not all bad for the Tories today because I think there's another poll in The Sun in relation to Rishi Sunak. What's that saying?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of talk about will the Tories oust Sunak, will Penny Mordaunt take the crown, but this is saying that 62% of Brits want Sunak to remain in place. And actually, look, I think it makes complete sense. You can't have a third Prime Minister come in who doesn't have a democratic mandate. Totally unsustainable.
Yeah, for sure. Although there are some within the Tory party, David Frost, Robert Jenrick, people like that are saying, look, we really have to change course. Things are getting worse and worse and worse as the year goes on. They're not getting any better. We need to do something. We need to do something fast.
Yeah, but I think that ultimately divided parties don't win
elections.
No
doubt about that.
And, they have to hold their nerve now.
Yeah. And the third thing that we noticed, I think it's in the Mail on Sunday, is about the timing, of course, of the poll, because there's a lot of talk about when is the general election going to be.
So I think there's a big fear. You've got the local elections coming up and also a number of mayoral elections. If the Tories do face a complete wipeout, lose loads of councillors, lose key people who are currently mayors, there'll be this call that Sunak has to go to the polls, or he'll face a leadership challenge. So I suppose they're raising the spectre of that to say to people, be careful what you wish for, because obviously, if a week is a long time in politics, a month, 6 months is an eternity. They'll be hoping that the economy turns around, the polls come back a bit more before this so-called November election date, which they want to go for.
Yeah. And that's all about the Tories, and obviously party of government. They're the ones that we're looking at most of the time. But there's an interesting story as well, isn't there, in the Mail on Sunday about a little battle that's going on between the Labour Party.
Yeah, there's a so-called turf war at the top of the Labour Party between Sue Gray, Starmer's powerful chief of staff, and a male-dominated hierarchy. And it talks about how she wants to bring more women into high-profile positions, even speculates that she may want a job in frontline politics. And there is this inherent tension between the return of some of the Labour big beasts, so Alistair Campbell, Peter Mandelson, coming back into the fray there. So interesting to raise because, amongst all the stories about Tory splits, there is a delicate piece at the top of the Labour Party. And I think, their rise in the polls can be explained much more by a Tory collapse rather than a Labour revival. They haven't been put under pressure. And actually, if Tories could hold their nerve, if they could instill some kind of discipline, I think you'd see Labour come under a lot more pressure and be tested a lot more. If you look at the polling, I think where Starmer comes is that people say, he's none of the above.
Yes.
But he's not sealed the deal with the electorate.
Yeah, he's not Tony Blair, I think, for a lot of the public. And it's interesting, I always think, to look at the don't knows in these polls to see where people are sitting, in terms of all of that. But I thought that was a very interesting story about Sue Gray, because, of course, the Labour Party still hasn't had a female leader. And they always claim that they're the party of equality and what have you. But they're still the people that we see here. There's a little bit of misogyny still going on within the Labour Party. Yeah,
I think they are inherently very sensitive to that. And even Harriet Harman has said, when it comes to this, the Tories have been a lot more progressive.
Yeah. And talking about implosions and the Tory party and what have you, there's been a huge story in Northern Ireland, Good Friday, of course, with the resignation of Jeffrey Donaldson, the leader of the DUP, and now Gavin Robinson, MP for East Belfast, has stepped forward as the interim leader. But a lot of moving parts going on there over Easter
obviously
weekend.
You'll know so much more about this than me, but sent shockwaves through Northern Irish politics. As I understand it, Gavin Robinson, seen as a continuity candidate, pragmatic kind of replacement, has been welcomed, it seems, by people across the political spectrum there as well. Interestingly, I think one of the papers this morning says Sammy Wilson, who could have been a DUP rebel, has come out and said, no, he's the right choice. I suppose the issue for the DUP is that, unfortunately, it may be the case that whatever the outcome, the spectre of this case may still be hanging over them at the next election. It may not be settled one way or the other. Yeah,
justice is never fast in Northern Ireland, I have to say. But it is interesting, I think, when you see people like Sammy Wilson, who has been a stalwart of the DUP for so many years, saying, look, the decision to put Gavin Robinson in as a deputy leader was a unanimous one. Yeah. He has all of our support, and I think Gavin is going to be very much a stabilising influence there within the party. Moving on from politics here to politics in the US, never boring.
Yeah,
Giles, what's going on there at the moment?
Well, there's reports of a Biden bounce. Obviously, for a long time, Trump was storming ahead in the polls, but it seems like Biden has come back. I think a couple of polls this week had him ahead. Apparently, he's doing very well in sort of 6 key battleground states. But also, there's been a lot of talk about he's changed his style about how to deal with Trump. And I think it's quite interesting. I think also the media don't really know how to deal with Trump, and they approach him in the wrong way. You can't really unpick his policies because there isn't really a coherent agenda there. What you've seen is that Biden now is getting a lot more personal and mocking him. For instance, I think Trump tweeted this week that he'd won a golf tournament, and Biden tweeted back, quite the accomplishment, Donald. There's also, we see tweets from him sort of saying that Trump's not interested in anything outside of his own country club or anything outside of the country. So I think they're seeing they've got to get down a lot more sort of down and dirty and personal with him. But it seems to be working. And it's also very interesting, I think, because Trump is not someone who likes being mocked.
No.
He takes himself very seriously. So they have to sort of change the dynamic and change the weather. And also, you must remember, Trump has never won the popular vote in either of the presidential races that he has stood in. So I still think, it's still there to be won for Biden.
But Trump is more of a phenomenon, isn't he? It's not really about policies. It's how he makes people feel. Isn't that right?
Yeah, emotion trumps reason, as it often does in politics. He's much more a concept. But I think also to that point, you can't really attack his policies. You're going to have to go for him and see where it goes.
But do you think that's going to work in the long term? Because, I mean, people tried that with Boris Johnson, who was another phenomenon and really made people feel in a particular way about politics. And, he sort of shirked it off until the end.
Until the end, although Boris did have the popular vote, right?
Yeah.
Unlike Trump.
Oh, yes, of course.
He had, he was much more he reached larger parts of the UK than Trump did with the US. So I think there has to be a different approach, because so far the policy approach hasn't really worked. Yeah,
and it's the old line of you go low, we go high doesn't seem to be working for Biden, so he's now just going to go low as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it seems to have worked. And I no doubt you can see with Trump it will hurt him.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see how Trump actually reacts to that,
this,
because, he hasn't really had that before, has he?
No, completely.
No. And the other story that we were looking at was one on the cost of living in relation to, above all, Easter eggs, and the fact that it's costing more to buy Easter eggs, and it's actually costing more to go out and have your Sunday lunch today as well. It was quite amazing, I thought, because the figures that we're talking about was 7% more to go out and have your Sunday lunch in just 1 year. That's quite incredible.
Yeah, and you've seen a lot of talk about, has the cost of living crisis ended? But it is obviously still there. Obviously, inflation's coming down, but the government will really hope will be off the agenda at the election, because there'll be that classic question: do you feel better off 5 years on with a Tory government? And I suppose there's a big question mark hanging over that at the moment.
Yeah. And the last story I wanted to turn to, and one which Easter is about hope, and it's about renewal, and it's about looking to the future, is this on the front page of the Sunday Express. New wonder jab will prevent dementia. I think for a lot of people, that'll be a really good news story today, won't it?
Yeah, really hopeful. I mean, sadly, dementia affects nearly 1 million people in the UK. I think that figure's going to go up to 1.4 million, and they've had the trial of this drug. There are some case studies mentioned in the article say, actually, we think it's working. It could be on the market within 5 years. So, lots of hope there. Let's hope that it does happen. Yeah,
and I mean, for a lot of people who are living longer now than they would have done maybe 30, 40 years ago, and they would have died in their 60s or 70s, people living now into their 80s and 90s, but a lot of them developing dementia, and it's become a real challenge. In a way, I don't think I realized when I was a child, you didn't really hear about people with dementia, but now it's become a real issue, hasn't it, in the UK and across the globe?
It's had a lot more publicity, like you say. It's kind of come to the fore about how many people it affects. And to your point, massive strain on the social care system as people live longer and longer. So I think this drug is meant to be preventative, that you sort of take it, you know, sort of, I suppose, when you get into your 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and I mean, look, it's being trialled at sort of very esteemed academic institutions. So, yeah, like you say, a lot of hope and optimism.
Yeah, cancer, dementia, anything that comes along to try and deal with those two big issues, I think, will be very much welcomed by anybody in society. And as I say, on Easter Sunday, it is so good to give it that. So, Giles, if you had to call it, going back to politics, just as we finish up on this Easter Sunday, when do you think that all-important general election is going to come?
I still think it will probably be November the 14th. So
really?
2 weeks after the US elections. They need a long runway in. They will hope the economy will turn around.
When's the election in America?
It's November the 5th or the 6th.
OK.
So, yeah, so there'll be some time after that. So I think probably then.
Yeah. And by then, the new Prime Minister will know whether he's going to have a relationship with Biden or Trump.
Yeah,
and you still think it's too close to call there?
In America or here?
In America. No, not here.
Yeah.
I think everybody knows where the direction of travel is here.
Yeah, I think, like, too close to call. If I was to put money in, I'd probably say Biden just edges it. Obviously, Trump's got the spectre of all these criminal cases hanging over him, which obviously is a huge opportunity cost there, right, for him, no matter what people say.